The scanner finished its third pass and printed a single line that Archivist Vel had never seen in 200 years of service. No matching record. He read it again, slowly, because the cataloging console of the survey ship Meridian Index did not make mistakes. It held the shape of every vessel ever built by every species in the Concord of 40 suns. Even the wrecks, even the toys, even the ceremonial barges that had not flown in 1,000 cycles. It had matched all of them. It had never once returned an empty result. Now it had, and the empty result was sitting in the lower bay of a forgotten salvage station called Dock 9, half buried under cargo netting and gray dust, looking like nothing at all. "Run it again," Vel said. The junior beside him, a thin clerk named Osk, tapped the panel. The beam swept across the object below. Numbers crawled up the screen. Mass, high, far too high for the size. Hull density, past the upper edge of the chart. Composition, unknown alloy, layered, folded back on itself many times the way a smith folds a blade. And then the same line again, calm and final. No matching record. Osk laughed, because that was easier than being afraid. "It is junk," he said. "Look at it. It has been here longer than the station. The plating is corroded. Half the lights are dead. It is a derelict somebody dragged in to strip and then forgot. The catalog has no record, because there is nothing worth recording." Vel did not laugh. He had been an archivist long enough to know the difference between a thing that was empty and a thing that was hidden. The object below was not empty. The scanner kept trying to find its edges, and kept failing, as if the hull went deeper than the eye could follow, as if the metal continued on past the place where metal should have stopped. "Try the mass against the size again," he said. "Slowly. I want to watch it fail." Oska did, more to humor him than anything. The beam crawled across the dark wedge in the bay, measuring its length, its breadth, the slope of its scarred flanks, and then it tried to weigh what it had measured, and the two numbers refused to agree. A hull that long, that wide, should have massed a certain amount. This one massed 3 times that, and the console could not say why, because the answer lay inside, in the layered alloy folded back on itself, in a density that did not belong to any shipyard the Concord had ever indexed. "That is a sensor fault," Osk said, but he had stopped grinning while he said it. The Meridian Index had come to Dock 9 for a routine reason. The Concord was preparing a census of all salvage in the outer belts, a tidy accounting of scrap and debris, because the Concord loved accounting above all things. It measured, it listed, it sorted the galaxy into rows, and felt safe inside the rows. For 4,000 years the rows had held. Every species was a number, every weapon was a known quantity, every threat had a column and a value, and the value of the small wet world at the edge of the maps had been entered long ago as harmless, primitive, no fleet, no reach, beneath notice. That entry was about to cost them everything, though none of them knew it yet. "Magnify," Vel said. The image swelled. The shape resolved out of the dust. It was long, far longer than it had looked, a dark wedge with a spine of broken towers along its back, and a prow worn smooth at the edge, as if it had pushed through something hard, a great many times. Gun batteries lined the flanks, most of them dark, a few of them not. Old script ran along the bow, letters in a tongue the catalog did not hold, and beneath the grime, Vel could just make out a single faded mark, a name worn nearly to nothing. He could not read it. The catalog could not read it. The catalog had no language for it at all. He sat with that for a moment. In 200 years of service, Vel had cataloged the languages of 40 species and the dead scripts of a dozen more. He had a name for everything. To meet a script with no name was like meeting a color he had never seen, and a small frightened part of his mind whispered that a thing with no name in the catalog was a thing the catalog had never been meant to hold. "Where did it come from?" Vel said. It was not a question. It was the thing the whole console was failing to answer. Osk shrugged, trying to climb back into his small, safe idea of the world. "Does it matter? It is dead. The reactor signature is flat. There is no crew, no heat. It has been cold for centuries. We log it as unidentified scrap. We move on. We make our census date. Honestly, Archivist, you are staring at a rust heap as if it might bite." Vel kept staring. There was a feeling he had learned to trust over 2 centuries, a small, cold weight that settled behind the eyes when the catalog and the truth did not match. He had felt it 3 times before. The first time, a survey crew had logged a quiet moon and woken something under its ice. The second time, a trade fleet had catalogued a derelict and carried home what was sleeping in its hold. The third time, Vel had been the only one to argue and the only one to live. Each time, something terrible had followed, and each time, it had begun exactly like this, with a number that would not agree with another number. He felt it now. "Pull the surrounding records," he said. "Everything logged in this belt for the last 1,000 cycles. I want to know who brought it here." Osk sighed and obeyed, because Vel outranked him, and indulging the old archivist was simpler than arguing. The record scrolled: salvage runs, stripped freighters, a mining accident, a pirate cache, and then a gap, a long, clean gap, 600 cycles wide, where no ship had logged anything in this sector at all. Before the gap, a single entry, partial, corrupted, almost erased. It listed a tow. The tow had brought one object to Dock 9 and registered it under a Concord code that meant, in the old bureaucratic shorthand, "Do not catalog, do not approach, do not wake." Osk stopped grinning for good. "Someone," Vel said slowly, "already had a record, and the record was an order to leave it alone." He leaned closer. The Concord code was old, older than Osk, older than most of the crew, a classification used only twice in the whole of Vel's career, both times for things that should not have existed. He had seen it once on a buried weapon platform that turned out to be still armed, and once on a sealed archive that nobody living had the authority to open. It was not a code for scrap. It was a code for danger the Concord had chosen to manage, by forgetting rather than by facing. Whoever had towed this hull here had not thought of it as junk. They had thought of it as a problem they did not know how to solve, and so they had hidden it under the one thing the Concord trusted more than walls. They had hidden it under paperwork. "Pull the tow's origin," Vel said. His voice had dropped. The bridge crew nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. Osk worked the panel, and the corrupted entry gave up one more fragment before it failed entirely. A single place name, half scrubbed, the letters fighting through the corruption like something refusing to drown. Vel read it, and the cold weight behind his eyes turned to ice. "Marin Reach," he said aloud. The name meant nothing to Osk. It meant nothing to most of the crew. It was a closed entry, a solved campaign, 600 cycles in the past, the kind of thing the Concord taught as a footnote and a victory. Vel knew it only because he was old enough to have filed the closing report himself, a young archivist's first great task, stamping a campaign solved without ever once asking what had been on the other side of it. He had written the word solved in his own hand, 600 years ago, and he had never thought of it since. He thought of it now. He thought of how little he had known when he wrote it. He thought of the empty space on the wall of the High Command's Great Hall, the place where a certain enemy's entry should have been and never was, and he had assumed, the way a young clerk assumes, that the space was empty because the enemy had been nothing. It had not occurred to him, then, or in any of the 200 years since, that the space might be empty because someone had taken the enemy out of the books on purpose. The bay below them was quiet. The dark wedge sat in its netting, patient, the few live lights along its flank pulsing slow and even, like something breathing in its sleep. The meridian index hung above it, bright and proud and full of certainty, the certainty of a people who had measured the whole galaxy and found it small. "Archivist," Osk said, and his voice had changed. "The reactor signature. It was flat. It is not flat anymore." Vel looked at the readout. A single line had begun to rise from the bottom of the graph, slow and steady, the way the tide comes in. Heat where there had been no heat. Power where there had been none. The dead thing in Dock 9 was not dead. It had only been waiting, the way a fire waits under ash, for someone to come close enough, and look long enough, and care enough, to be worth waking for. "Get the bridge," Vel said. "Tell them to stop the survey. Tell them no one is to scan it again. Tell them whatever it is. The Concord buried it on purpose, and the Concord does not bury things that are safe. Tell them I filed the report that called it solved, and I was wrong, and the proof is heating up in the bay beneath us right now." Osk's hands shook over the panel. He opened the line to the bridge, but even as he did, Vel saw the thing he had most feared, a small bright icon blooming on the corner of the console. An active scan. Full power. The deep one. reaching all the way in. Somewhere on the survey ship, a younger officer who had not heard the order, who saw only an unidentified hull and a duty to catalog it, had decided to finish the job the right way and take the thing's number at last. Vel moved faster than he had moved in 50 years. He crossed the deck to the override panel, the one an archivist was never meant to touch, and he keyed his old authority code, the one from his days of stamping campaigns solved, and for one breath he thought it had worked, the deep scan flickering toward shutdown. But the younger officer on the gunnery deck, certain he was doing his duty, locked his console against the override and finished the sweep. Vel watched the bright icon complete its arc across the dark wedge below, a clean full reading, edge to edge, all the way in, and he understood that the most dangerous thing aboard the Meridian Index had never been the warship. It had been the certainty of a young creature taught his whole life that to catalog a thing was a kindness, and who could not imagine that anything in the galaxy would object to being known. "Stop them," Vel said, though it was already done. "Stop them now, that is the one thing we must not." The hull below them answered. The answer was not a weapon. That was what frightened Vel most. Later, when he had time to be frightened, the answer was a signal. It came up out of the dark hull as a single pulse of structured light, and it struck the Meridian Index across every band the survey ship listened on. The cataloging console, the proud machine that had matched the whole galaxy, received the pulse and tried to do the only thing it knew how to do. It tried to file it, it opened a record, it reached for a column, and then, for the first time in 4,000 years of Concord service, the catalog began to delete itself. "What is it doing?" Osk whispered. Vel did not know. No one aboard knew. Lines of stored shapes flickered and vanished, whole families of vessels, whole species of design, gone in the space of a breath, as if the signal were not data at all but a key, and the key had been cut to open every lock in the archive at once. Vel lunged for the manual cutoff and pulled it. The console went dark. The pulse stopped. And in the silence that followed, the dark wedge in Dock 9 finished waking up. Light ran along its flanks, not the slow, even pulse from before, but a fast sweep, bow to stern, as 100 dead batteries came back to life one after another, like a city seen from orbit at the moment the power returns. Heat bloomed across the hull. The reactor line on the dead readout had become a wall. Where there had been a cold corpse, there was now something vast and warm and very much alive, and it had simply been resting, the way a thing rests when it has nothing left to fear. Osk was staring at the deleted archive, his hands frozen over the dead panel. "It did not destroy our records," he said, and there was a new kind of fear in his voice, the fear of a clerk who has understood something his whole profession was built to deny. "Archivist. It did not just delete them, it read them first. It took everything we had on it, and then it took everything we had on the rest of the fleet, and then it erased the copy it left us. It does not want us to know what it knows. It wants to be the only one holding the list." Vel had not thought of it that way, and the thought spread the cold weight from behind his eyes down into his chest. The warship had not been damaging them. It had been collecting 600 years of patience, and then, in one pulse, it had emptied the survey ship's archive into its own memory and left the Concord blind, in the exact moment the Concord most needed to see. Worse, Vel realized, it had taken only what it lacked. It had not touched the records of species it already knew. It had reached precisely for the fleet dispositions, the patrol routes, the refueling schedules, the names and courses of the 400 ships of the old Marin Reach campaign. It had taken a soldier's intelligence, neatly, and left everything else. A monster would have burned the whole archive. This thing had filed a requisition. On the bridge of the Meridian Index, the survey commander, an old and careful officer named Tail, of the Concord Census Service, was demanding to know why his archive had emptied. Vel reached him on the internal line, and his own voice surprised him with how steady it was. "Commander," he said, "the object in Dock 9 is not salvage. It is a warship. It is intact. It is powering up. And it is not in our records because someone, 600 cycles ago, removed it from our records on purpose and ordered it left to sleep. The tow came from Marin Reach. I think we just woke something we buried, and I think it has been waiting the whole time for someone to do exactly what we did." Tail was silent for a moment. Then, because he was a creature of the Concord, And the Concord answered fear with procedure. He said the worst possible thing. Identify it. Scan deeper. I want a full profile before I decide anything. No, Vel said. Commander, do not scan it. Do not touch it. The deep scan is what woke it. Another will be read as a threat. It is not asleep anymore, and a thing that has slept for 600 years does not forgive the hand that shakes it. You are an archivist, Tail said, and Vel heard the old certainty fighting to hold its ground. You catalog things. You do not command this ship. I have a duty to identify an unknown vessel in a Concord station. I will discharge it. Your duty to identify it is exactly the trap, Vel said, and he was almost begging now, 200 years of careful detachment gone in a breath. Commander, please. It has been listening to us our whole lives. It knows the scan is coming. It is waiting for it. The scan is the only invitation it needs. But the certainty of the Concord was a hard thing to break. Tail had measured the galaxy his whole life. He did not believe in things that could not be measured. He gave the order. The deep array of the Meridian Index, an instrument designed to count the rivets on a hull from 1,000 kilometers away, turned its full attention on the dark wedge below and reached all the way into the heart of the thing, to take its number. The dark wedge did not like being touched. What happened next happened in 11 seconds, and Vel would spend the rest of his life going over each one. In the first second, the warship's flank batteries finished charging, a soft rising tone audible even through the station's hull. In the second second, the docking netting that had held the warship for 600 cycles simply fell away, burned through, the clamps releasing as if they had never been locked. In the third second, the warship moved. It did not lumber. It did not strain. A mass that should have taken minutes to shift came off the dock floor in a single smooth lift, and Vel understood, watching, that the catalog had been right to fail. There was no column for this. There was no number for a thing this size that moved like a thing 100th its size. In the fourth second, the salvage station began to come apart around the rising hull, not from any shot, but simply from the wake of a thing that large, moving that fast, through a space built for small, still cargo. Gantries folded. Loading arms snapped. The dock that had cradled the warship for 6 centuries shrugged off its grip and fell away in slow tumbling pieces, and the few station workers in the lower bay scrambled for the lifts, and not one of them was harmed, because the warship had already calculated where they would run and where its wake would fall, and had timed its rise to spare them. Even waking, even in its first motion in 600 years, it was being careful with the ones who had not earned its memory. By the 5th second, it had cleared the bay and turned, and for the first time, the Meridian Index saw the whole of it against open space, and the whole survey crew, 412 souls who had spent their careers being certain, went silent together. It was enormous. It was scarred. It was old in a way that nothing in the Concord catalog was old, because the Concord built clean ships and replaced them on schedule, and never let a hull weather, never let a vessel earn its dents. This thing had earned every mark on it. Its prow was worn smooth from pushing through fire. Its towers were rebuilt and rebuilt again, layer on layer, old wars stacked one atop the next. Along its bow, the worn name caught the station lights, and now, closer, Vel could almost read it, almost, a word in the dead human tongue, and he found he did not want to read it, because to read a thing was to file it, and he had the sudden certain sense that this was a thing that should never have been filed at all. In the 7th second, a junior gunnery officer aboard the Meridian Index, acting on the standing order to defend the survey ship against any unidentified threat, fired. It was a single defensive shot, a warning shot really, the kind the Concord used to make a point, and never to start a war. It struck the warship squarely on its scarred flank. It did nothing. Vel watched the bolt of energy splash across the ancient hull and dissipate, leaving not a mark, not a scorch, not so much as a flicker in the warship's rising power curve. The Andeskel did not even turn. It registered the shot the way a mountain registers a thrown stone, and Vel understood in that instant that every certainty the Concord had ever held about its own strength had been an accounting error, a number entered against a thing that had never agreed to be counted. He thought of all the small worlds the Concord had culled by the numbers, all the harmless entries, all the columns marked beneath notice, and he wondered, with a cold that reached his bones, How many of those entries had been as wrong as this one, and had simply never been given the chance to prove it? "Commander," Vel said into the line, "tell them to stop firing. It is not the enemy. If we make it the enemy, we will not survive the correction. Run. Now. Order the station evacuated and run." And Tail, to his credit, finally listened, but the warship was faster. It did not fire on the Meridian Index. That was the first mercy, and the first horror, because it meant the warship had decided the survey ship was not the enemy. It meant the warship was looking for the enemy, and it had a very long memory, and the enemy in its memory was the Concord that had towed it here, and locked it down, and ordered it forgotten. The warship swung past the survey ship without a glance, the way a soldier walks past a child, and it pointed its worn prow out toward the relay station 6 light minutes away that carried every Concord signal in this quarter of the sky, and it began to move. "It is hailing us," Osk said. His grin was gone for good now. "Archivist, it is hailing the station. There is a voice." Vel put it on the speaker before he could think better of it. The voice that came through was calm and tired and human, recorded long ago, the words worn the way the hull was worn. It spoke in the dead tongue first, and then, because the warship was a patient thing and wanted to be understood, it spoke again in flat, clean Concord standard, a translation the warship must have built itself from listening, quietly, for 600 cycles, to everything the certain people around it had ever said. "This is the human vessel Andus Kell," the voice said. "We were the second ship of the line. We held the Dark Gate at Marin Reach for 9 days against the Concord Warfleet, while the colony behind us emptied. When the fleet broke through, the Concord did not destroy us. They could not. So they took us instead. They cut our crew loose into the cold, they emptied our archives, and they towed us here. And they wrote us out of their books, and they told their children we never existed. They thought a thing forgotten was a thing defeated." The voice paused. On the dark hull, the batteries glowed brighter. "They were wrong about that," the voice said. "We have been listening the whole time. We know where the fleet went. We know what they did to the colony. And we have been counting too." Vel sat very still. Around him the bridge crew of the Meridian Index, the proud counters of the galaxy, listened to a number being read back to them from the dark. "You sent 400 ships to Marin Reach," the voice said. "We logged every one of them as it passed our dock to refuel, year after year, on its way to the next small world it meant to count and cull. 400. We have their names. We have their courses. We have been awake longer than you think, and we have been very patient, and patience is the only weapon a forgotten thing has left." The warship cleared the last of the station's gravity well. Its engines lit, not the soft blue of Concord drives, but a deep furnace orange that threw the whole salvage station into stark relief. And for one moment, Dock 9 was lit like a thing remembered. The rust and the dust and the broken gantries all picked out in warm, hard light. And Vel thought it looked less like a ship leaving, and more like a sun coming up over a place that had been in shadow for 600 years. "You came to count the dead," the Andus Kell said. "We are not dead. We were waiting for someone to look at us long enough to wake us. Thank you for looking." And then it was gone. A streak of furnace light driving out toward the relay, and the 400 names beyond it, and the Meridian Index hung alone above the dock that had held the thing for 6 centuries. And Commander Tail said, in a small voice, the question that would haunt the whole Concord before the next year was out. "How?" he said. "Was that not in the catalog?" Vel did not answer right away. He was watching the streak of orange dwindle toward the relay, and he was thinking about the gap in the records, the clean 600-cycle gap where nothing had been logged. And he understood now that the gap had not been empty. The gap had been a grave the Concord dug for an enemy it could not kill, and graves, it turned out, did not always stay shut. "It was in the catalog once," Vel said quietly, "and then someone decided it was safer to pretend it never was. That is the thing about forgetting, Commander. The forgotten do not forget you back. They wait." He looked at the dead console, at the empty space where 4,000 years of certainty had been, and for the first time in 200 years, he was glad an archive had failed, because a record that could be deleted had never been the truth. The truth was, the streak of orange light driving toward the relay, and the truth could not be deleted, only met. The relay station ahead was a Concord beacon, a bright, tidy thing that bounced fleet orders across the quarter, the nerve that connected 400 ships to the high command that steered them. It had stood for 900 cycles. Its crew of 60 had never seen a shot fired in anger, because the Concord did not fight wars where its own ships could be seen to bleed. The Concord fought wars the way it did everything else, at a distance, by the numbers, with a column for the cost and a column for the gain, and the relay was where those columns were added up. The Andus Kell reached it in 4 minutes. Vel watched on the survey array, because Tail could not bring himself to look away, and could not bring himself to follow either, and so the Meridian Index simply hung in place and witnessed. The relay's crew, seeing a single unscheduled contact approach at speed, did what the Concord trained them to do. They scanned it. They tried to file it. And Vel, watching the same readout fail the same way his own had failed, felt the cold weight settle deeper, because he knew now what the failure meant. It meant the relay had just done the one thing the warship counted as a declaration. It had reached in. The Andus Kell did not delete the relay's archive. It did something that told Vel exactly how patient the thing truly was. It hailed the relay first, on every band, and it gave them 4 minutes warning. 4 full minutes. A courtesy the Concord had never once given any small world it had counted and culled. "You have 4 minutes to leave," the warship said. "We are not the Concord. We will not pretend you were never here. Go, and live, and tell them what you saw. Tell them the Andus Kell is awake. Tell them we are coming for the 400. Tell them we kept the names." Some of the relay crew believed it. Some did not. The Concord had taught them for 900 years that nothing in the galaxy could threaten them, and a lesson that old is hard to unlearn in 4 minutes. 40 of the 60 boarded the lifeboats and ran. 20 stayed at their posts, because they trusted the rows, because they had a column that said they were safe. And a column is a hard thing to die for but an easy thing to trust. Vel listened to their chatter on the open band, the steady, confident voices of creatures who had never once been wrong about anything that mattered, calling for fleet support, requesting reinforcement, certain that help would arrive because help had always arrived. He wanted to reach through the signal and shake them. He wanted to tell them that the help they were calling for was 4 light minutes away, and the thing at their door had waited 600 years, and would not be talked out of 4 minutes by anyone's certainty. At the 4-minute mark, exactly, not a second early and not a second late, the Andus Kell opened fire. Vel had braced for chaos. What he saw instead was worse than chaos. It was precision. It was care. The warship's batteries spoke in a measured sequence, one after another, each shot landing exactly where the warship intended and nowhere else. And the relay station came apart not in a single blast, but in a deliberate dismantling, section by section, the way a thing is taken apart by someone in no hurry who wants it done right. The lifeboats with the 40 aboard were not touched. The warship had given its word, and the warship kept its word, and that, Vel understood, was the most terrifying thing of all. This was not a monster. A monster would have been simpler. This was a soldier with a list and a long memory and nothing left to lose, and it intended to keep every promise it made, the kind ones and the other kind both. When the relay was gone, the warship sat in the wreckage for a moment, its furnace engines dim, and then it sent one last signal back along the Concord's own relay frequency, broadcast wide. It was short. Vel wrote it down by hand, because he wanted it to exist somewhere that could not be deleted. "One down," the Andus Kell said. 399 to go. We counted you. Now you can feel what that is like. And the survey ship Meridian Index, the great cataloging vessel of the Concord of 40 suns, turned and ran for home with a true record in its memory, for the first time in its life, a record of a thing that could not be filed, would not be sorted, and was no longer asleep. Vel did not sleep on the run home. He sat at the dead console and listened. The warship broadcast as it traveled, not threats, not boasts, but names, plainly read, the way a clerk reads a ledger aloud to check it. Each name was a ship of the 400. Each name was followed by a date, a place, and a single deed, and the deeds were small and exact and terrible. Fired on the second transport, sealed the relief lock, refused the cease order, logged the colony as harvested. The Andus Kell was not making a speech. It was reading evidence. And every captain in the quarter who heard their own ship's name read aloud with their own deed beside it, understood, in that moment, that the dead had been a witness in the room the whole time, and that the room had never once been private. Osk listened beside him, pale, and at last he said the thing Vel had been circling for hours. "It is not even angry," the young clerk said. "I keep waiting for it to be angry, and it never is. It just reads. That is the worst part. We could survive a thing that hated us. We do not know how to survive a thing that is only accurate." Vel said nothing, because there was nothing to add. Accuracy, it turned out, was the one weapon the Concord had never built a defense against, because the Concord had spent 4,000 years believing it owned accuracy outright. The high command of the Concord of 40 Suns received the report the way it received all reports, as a problem of classification. The chamber where they met was called the Hall of Final Tallies, a wide, cold room lined with the names of every species the Concord had counted, and closed. And at its center stood the first tabulator, the eldest of the cataloging caste, a creature so old that it had personally ordered the Marin Reach campaign 600 cycles before. Its name was Sereth, and it had spent its whole long life believing that anything could be solved if you measured it carefully enough. When Vel's report reached the hall, brought by the trembling Commander Tail in person, Sereth listened to all of it. The empty record, the deletion, the worn name, the relay coming apart section by section, and at the end, it asked only one question. "What class is it?" Tail did not understand. "First tabulator?" "What class?" Sereth said again, patient, certain. "Every vessel has a class has a counter has a number. Give me the number and I will give you the ships required to retire it. This is arithmetic. The galaxy is arithmetic. A single hull, however old, however angry, is a single hull. We have 4,000. Tell me what it is, and I will tell you how many it takes." And Vel, who had been brought along because he had seen the thing with his own eyes, spoke out of turn for the first time in 2 centuries. "That is the mistake," he said. "First tabulator, forgive me, but that is exactly the mistake. It does not have a class. It refused our class. When we tried to give it a number, it deleted the book we keep the numbers in. You are asking how many ships it takes to retire a thing that has spent 600 years learning how many ships you have, where they are, and what they are afraid of. It is not a hull. It is a hunter we built a cage for, and then forgot to keep watching." Sereth turned its ancient eyes on Vel, and for a moment something flickered behind them that might have been memory. Sereth had been at Marin Reach. Sereth had given the order to take the human ship instead of killing it, because killing it had proven impossible, and a cage was cheaper than a war. Sereth remembered the 9 days. Sereth remembered the dark gate that would not break, and the colony that emptied behind it, ship by ship, while the human vessel held, and the way the war fleet had finally broken through, only to find nothing left to count but cold rock and a single battered hull that would not stop firing until its crew were safe. Sereth had ordered that hull towed away and erased. Sereth had told the Concord it was a victory, and Sereth, alone in the hall, knew that it had never been a victory at all. It had been a thing put off. The other counters of the hall did not know this. They knew only the official record, the one Sereth had written, and so they argued about the report the way they argued about everything, in numbers. One proposed sending 200 ships, another said 500. A third, a young aggressive tabulator named Quoll who had never seen a war in his life, laughed at all of them, and said the simplest answer was the largest one. Send 1,000, send 2,000. There was no enemy in the galaxy a Concord number could not solve if the number was big enough. "It is one ship," Quoll said, spreading his hands. "I do not understand the panic in this hall. We have lost a relay and a few hulls, because old captains scanned a thing instead of shooting it. Stop scanning it. Shoot it. The arithmetic could not be plainer." "You were not there," Vel said quietly. "Neither were you, archivist," Quoll shot back. "You filed a closing report from a desk. I have read the Marin Reach record. It says the campaign was a clean success. It says nothing about a hull that cannot be killed. So either the record is wrong, or you are. And the record was written by the first tabulator. Are you telling this hall that the first tabulator's own record is a lie?" The hall went very still, because no one accused the first tabulator's own record of being wrong. Vel looked at Sereth, and Sereth looked back, and in that long shared silence, The oldest counter of the Concord made a choice. It did not defend the record. It said nothing at all, and its silence was the loudest thing in the hall, because every creature there had spent its life trusting that record, and now its author would not stand behind it. Qual's certainty faltered, just for a heartbeat, the first crack in a young creature who had never imagined the foundation under his feet might be made of something other than truth. "Tell us the number then," Qual said, but his voice had lost its edge. "If the record is wrong, tell us the right one. How many ships does it take?" "I do not know," Sereth said. The whole hall flinched. The first tabulator of the Concord of 40 Suns had never in living memory said those 4 words aloud. "I tried to learn it once. At Marin Reach. I sent 400 ships against 1 hull and 9 days, and I learned only that there are things the arithmetic cannot hold. So I did the cowardly thing. I took the thing out of the arithmetic. I erased the question so I would never have to answer it. And now the question has woken up, and it is coming to make us answer it, one name at a time." "Send the iron tally," Sereth said at last, into the silence its confession had made. The iron tally was the Concord's standing armada, the force kept ready for the rare occasions when arithmetic failed, and something had to be made an example of. It numbered 800 ships. It had never lost an engagement, because the Concord never committed it to an engagement it had not already won on paper. 800 against 1. It is the only number I have left. Whether it is the right one, we will learn together. Vel wanted to say that numbers were exactly what the warship had been making lie since the moment it woke. He did not. There was no arguing with arithmetic in the Hall of Final Tallies. Even arithmetic offered without faith. So he asked the only thing he had left to ask. "Where will you send them, first tabulator?" "It is moving down a list. 400 names. It is not coming here. It is going to them, one at a time, in order. And it does not need to win against 800. It only needs to reach the next name before you can defend it. You cannot defend 400 ships at once. You never built a fleet to protect itself. You built it to cull worlds that could not fight back. It knows that. It is counting on it." Sereth did not answer, but the eldest of the counters had begun, for the first time in 600 cycles, to do a different kind of math, the kind that does not balance. Far out along the belt, the Andus Kell reached the second name on its list. The second name was the cruiser Exact Measure, and it was not waiting to be reached, because word of the relay had spread faster than the High Command had hoped. The Exact Measure had been at Marin Reach. Its captain, a hard, cold creature named Drevin, who had served 60 cycles and never once feared anything, had laughed when the warning came through. He had pulled the old campaign record. He had seen the human vessel listed there, struck through, marked retired, filed under solved, and he had done what every certain creature in this story did, right up until the moment it stopped being able to. He had scanned it. The Andus Kell came up out of the dark of the belt with its furnace engines cold and quiet, running dark the way it had run for 600 years, and the Exact Measure's beam swept across it, and found, as every beam had found, no matching record. Drevin frowned. He ordered a deeper scan. He reached in, and the warship, which had been waiting patiently for exactly this, lit its engines and its guns in the same instant, and closed the distance before the Exact Measure's certainty could become fear. It was over in 90 seconds. The Andus Kell did not destroy the Exact Measure. It crippled it, precisely, with the same terrible care it had shown the relay, knocking out the drives and the weapons, and leaving the life systems intact, and then it hailed the wounded cruiser, and let its old recorded voice speak one more time. "Captain Drevin of the Exact Measure," the warship said, because it had kept the names, all of them, and it knew exactly who it was talking to. "You were the ship that fired on the 3rd Colony transport at Marin Reach. We logged the shot. We logged the 410 aboard her who never reached the gate. We have carried that number for 600 years. Now you will carry it too. You will live. You will drift here until your own fleet finds you, and when they ask what happened, you will tell them the truth. You will tell them the dead came back, and the dead kept the books, and the dead are reading the names out loud." Drevin tried to argue, even broken, even drifting. He told the warship that he had only followed orders, that the order to fire on the transport had come from above, that he had been a soldier, and a soldier obeys. And the warship answered him in a way that Vel, listening from the Meridian Index, never forgot, because it was the answer of a thing that had thought about exactly this for 600 years. Every name on my list said the same thing, the warship said. I sorted you anyway. The ones who fired and called it orders, and the ones who fired and were proud. I sorted them together, because to the 410 on that transport, it made no difference at all which kind of creature pulled the trigger. You want me to weigh your reasons. I weighed your deeds. That is the only weight that was ever fair to the dead. And Drevin had no answer to that, because there was none. Because the warship had found the one scale that the Concord's whole civilization of counters had spent 4,000 years avoiding, which was the scale that counted what a thing did, and not what a thing meant to do. And the Andis Kel turned away from the broken cruiser, and moved on down its list, and behind it, the exact measure drifted in the dark, alive, ruined, carrying a number it could not put down. This was the pattern that began to spread terror through the iron tally, faster than the warship itself ever could. It was not the destruction. The Concord could have understood destruction, filed it, balanced it. It was the selection. The warship knew exactly who had done what at Marin Reach. It spared the ones who had only followed. It crippled the ones who had only obeyed. And the ones who had given the orders, the captains whose names sat highest on its list, those it dismantled section by section in full view of the others, slowly, so the lesson would take, and then it broadcast their crimes on the Concord's own frequencies for the whole quarter to hear. The Concord had built its power on counting. The Andis Kel had spent 600 years learning to count back. What truly broke the nerve of the fleet was not knowing which kind of name they were. Every captain in the iron tally now pulled the old Marin Reach record, the one Sereth had written, and found it useless, because it recorded only the victory and not the deeds, and so no captain could be certain whether his own ship's name sat on the spared list, the crippled list, or the dismantled list. A whole armada of certain creatures suddenly could not answer the only question that mattered, which was, what have I done? And a thing that has spent its life never asking that question does not bear the asking well. Crews that had never feared anything began to fear the dark between the stars, because the dark was where a list was being read, and none of them knew their place in it. In the hall of final tallies, the reports came in faster than Sereth could file them. The relay, gone. The exact measure, crippled. The frigate's sum total, dismantled. Its captain's name broadcast to 9 systems. The destroyer net result, run down and disabled while it fled. Its captain spared because the warship's list said he had only watched. The corvette first estimate untouched, passed over entirely. Its captain left to wonder for the rest of his life why the dead had judged him innocent. And then the highest name yet, the dreadnought final sum, the ship that had given the order at Marin Reach to seal the gate while transports were still inside it. The ship whose captain had risen since to admiral, and now commanded a fortified anchorage, protected by 3 rings of guns and a standing garrison of 40 escorts. The Concord believed the final sum was the one name the warship could never reach. The Concord was wrong. The Andis Kel did not assault the anchorage. It arrived above it, alone, and broadcast the final sum's deed to the garrison first, the order to seal the gate. The 1,100 who had been on the wrong side of it, read out in the warship's flat, patient voice, and then it offered the garrison the same choice it had offered the relay: leave and live, and carry the truth. Half the garrison left. The half that left did so not from fear but from shame, because the deed they had just heard was not a deed they wished to die defending. The warship took the final sum apart in the center of its own anchorage, slowly, in full view of its own rings of guns, and not one of those guns fired, because the creatures behind them had finally heard what they were protecting. Quoll, the young aggressive tabulator who had laughed in the hall, stopped laughing when the destroyer net result reported in, because the captain of the net result was his own kin, and the captain of the net result had been spared, and the message the warship had left him was worse than death. You only watched, it had said, so you may live, and watch what comes for the ones who did not. Quoll read that message over and over, and somewhere in the reading, the simple arithmetic he had trusted his whole life stopped adding up, because there was no column in any Concord book for the difference between a creature who acts and a creature who only watches, and the warship had a column for it, and the warship had filled it in for his own kin, and the warship had been right. Vel stood in the hall and watched the eldest counter of the Concord begin, at last, to break. "It is not possible," Sareth said, "to no one, to the names on the walls. One ship, 600 years dead. It cannot know our courses. It cannot know our names. The archive that held those names is sealed. It is in this hall. It has never left this hall." "It does not need your archive," Vel said gently, because he found, to his own surprise, that he pitied the old creature. First tabulator. It built its own. For 600 years, it sat in a salvage dock and listened to every ship that passed, every refueling manifest, every fleet order bounced off the relay above it, every name spoken in range of its hull. You towed it to the one place where all your traffic passed, and you told yourself the silence meant it was dead. It was not silence. It was a thing taking notes. We did not bury it where it could do no harm. We buried it at the crossroads, and we handed it 600 years and a perfect view, and we called that mercy. Sareth was silent for a long time. When it spoke again, its voice was almost too quiet to hear. "I chose Dock 9 myself," it said. "I remember thinking it was the safest place in the quarter, because it was the busiest, because a thing hidden in plain sight among so much traffic would never be looked at twice. I was proud of that reasoning. I thought it was clever. I never once considered that I had not hidden it from the traffic. I had introduced it to the traffic. 600 years of introductions. I built it the very list it is reading now." "How many names are left?" it asked at last. Vel checked the broadcasts, the ones the warship sent after every strike, the ones it wanted the Concord to hear. "It has taken 11, he said. 389 to go. It announces each one. It is in no hurry, first tabulator. It waited 600 years. It can wait another 600 if it has to. It only needs to outlast our certainty. And our certainty is the thing it has been eroding since the moment we woke it." And in the deep of the hall of final tallies, surrounded by the names of every species it had counted and closed, the first tabulator of the Concord of 40 suns understood for the first time that it was not the one keeping the list anymore. The iron tally finally caught the Andus Kell at the 91st name, and it caught it on purpose, because the warship had let itself be caught. Vel saw it happen from the deck of the Meridian Index, which Sareth had ordered to accompany the Armada as a witness, the only ship in the fleet whose archive had already failed, and so had nothing left to lose. 800 ships of the iron tally formed a sphere around a single dead gray wedge, and the warship sat at the center of the sphere, engines cold, guns dark, perfectly still, and for one moment, the whole certainty of the Concord came rushing back. 800 to 1, the numbers, at last, on their side. Arithmetic restored. The commander of the iron tally was a broad, confident creature named Hath, and Hath did what the Concord had trained him to do. He demanded surrender. He broadcasted on every band, the old formula, the words that had ended 100 small wars without a shot. "Vessel," he said, "you are surrounded by 800 ships of the Concord. Power down and submit to retirement. There is no number on which you survive this. Submit, and the cataloging will be merciful." The Andus Kell answered, and its old recorded voice was almost kind. "You still think this is about whether I survive," it said. "It was never about that. I died 600 years ago at Marin Reach. Everything since has been arithmetic. You taught me arithmetic. Let me show you what I learned." Hath gave the order to fire. 800 ships had been waiting for it, every gun trained on a single point. The most concentrated weight of fire the Concord had assembled in 1,000 cycles, and for one breath, the dark wedge at the center of the sphere vanished inside a storm of light, so bright that Vel had to look away from the array. The whole bridge of the Meridian Index held its breath together. Surely, the certainty whispered, surely nothing could live through that. Surely the arithmetic had finally found its footing. Surely a number that large was simply true. Then the storm cleared all the way, and the warship was still there, unmarked, and it was already moving. What followed broke the iron tally, not because the warship was stronger than 800 ships, but because the warship had spent 600 years studying exactly how the Concord fought, and the Concord, in 600 years, had not changed a single thing. It fought by the numbers, it held formation, it trusted the sphere, and the Andus Kell had built its entire plan around the one weakness arithmetic could never see, which was that a formation of 800 ships all obeying the same doctrine was not 800 ships. It was one ship, repeated 800 times, with one set of habits and one way of thinking. And a thing that has studied one of them has studied all of them. The warship did not try to break the sphere. It chose a single seam, the place where two squadrons of the Iron Tally met, and each assumed the other held the line, the exact gap that Concord doctrine created, and Concord pride refused to admit, and it drove for that seam, with its furnace engines wide open. The squadrons did what doctrine told them. They held position. They waited for the order to converge, and in the half-second it took that order to climb the chain of command and come back down, the Andeskel was through the seam and inside the sphere, and a sphere, once you are inside it, is no longer a trap. It is 800 ships that cannot fire without hitting each other. Vel watched the great machine of the Iron Tally turn against itself. The warship moved through the heart of the formation like a blade through cloth, and every shot the Concord ships fired at it now had 800 friends behind it, and the warship knew that, and it used it. It put Concord hulls between itself and Concord guns. It let the Armada's own discipline do half its work. Twice he watched a squadron fire on the warship and strike its own flank instead, the warship sliding out of the line of fire a heartbeat before the bolts arrived, having known where they would be aimed, because it had known, for 600 years, exactly how these ships were trained to aim. There was a moment, perhaps 4 minutes into it, when Hath tried to do the one thing that might have worked. He ordered the formation to break, to scatter, to abandon doctrine, and fight as 800 separate ships rather than one repeated one. It was the right order. It came too late, and it came against 600 years of training, and the fleet could not do it. A captain who has trusted the sphere his whole life cannot untrust it in a heartbeat. Half the ships broke and half held, and the half that held shot the half that broke, and the warship moved through the confusion of it untouched, and Vel understood that the order to scatter had not failed because it was wrong. It had failed because the Concord had spent 4,000 years teaching its captains that thinking for themselves was the same as breaking formation. And now, in the one moment it needed them to think, there was no one aboard 800 ships who remembered how. Where it did fire, the warship fired the way it had fired at the relay, with terrible care, knocking out drives and weapons, and leaving life systems whole, because the warship was still working its list, and these were not names on it. These were only the obstacle between it and the names, and the warship did not waste death on obstacles. Vel understood that even now, even surrounded, the Andeskel was not fighting for its life. It was making a point, and the point was arithmetic. It was showing the Concord, ship by ship, that the numbers they had trusted their whole history were not numbers at all. They were a habit, and a habit, unlike a number, can be learned and predicted and turned. Hath, on the flagship of the Iron Tally, screamed for order, for formation, for arithmetic to reassert itself. But arithmetic had left the field. There was no number now. There was only a single old hull at the center of his fleet, doing to 800 ships what 9 days at Marin Reach had taught it to do, which was to make every advantage of the Concord into a weight around its own neck. Vel kept the array trained on a single squadron through the worst of it, because he wanted to understand, not just to witness. It was the third squadron, 60 ships, the proudest of the Iron Tally, and he watched their commander try every answer the Concord had ever taught. Concentrate fire. The warship was already inside the cone. Form a wall. The warship was already behind it. Fall back to a reserve line. The warship had reached the reserve line first and was waiting. Every move the squadron made was a move the warship had seen made 10,000 times in 600 years of listening to fleet drills, bounced off the relay. And a thing that has heard your every rehearsal does not fear your performance. The squadron commander, at the very end, did the only thing left that the Concord had never drilled. He stopped fighting and simply broadcast, on an open band, a single question: "What do you want?" And the warship answered him, not with a recording, but live, 3 words, before it moved on. To be counted, the squadron commander lived. He spent the rest of his life trying to explain to anyone who would listen that they had lost not to a weapon, but to a question they had refused to answer for 600 years. In 11 minutes, the Iron Tally was no longer an armada. It was a debris field of crippled ships, drifting, alive, broadcasting distress on every band, and at its center, the Andes Kell hung unhurt, its hull marked with a few fresh scars to add to the 600 years of old ones, and it had not lost so much as a single battery. It did not destroy the flagship, it boarded it. Vel would never forget that part, because it was the part that proved the warship was not a force of nature, but a thing with a purpose. The Andes Kell came alongside Hath's flagship and held it gently, the way a hand holds a thing it does not wish to crush, and across the old recorded channel, it spoke to Hath directly, and for the first time, its voice was not a recording. It was live. There was someone, or something, still aboard the warship after 600 years, and Vel felt the cold weight behind his eyes become a flood. "Commander Hath," the warship said, "you are not on my list. You were a child when Marin Reach burned. You inherited this fleet. You inherited the lie that it could not be beaten. I am going to let you live, and I am going to give you a job, because the dead are allowed to give jobs to the living. You will carry a message to the Hall of Final Tallies. You will carry it to the first tabulator. You will say the name to its face." "What name?" Hath whispered. "Mine," the warship said. "It erased me. It told the Concord I never existed. It built its whole certainty on the idea that a forgotten thing is a finished thing. So you will go to it, and you will say the name on my bow, and you will watch what happens to its certainty when it hears a thing it buried say its own name out loud. That is the message. That is the whole message. Now go." "Why me?" Hath said. It was not defiance. It was something closer to grief. "Why not just end it? You have beaten the whole fleet. Why send me home to say a word?" "Because a word is heavier than a fleet," the warship said. "You will understand that when you carry it. The fleet you could have rebuilt. The word will outlast you. Now go, Commander, and be careful with it. It is the only weapon I have ever truly trusted." And the flagship of the Iron Tally, the proudest ship of the Concord of 40 Suns, turned and ran for home carrying a name like a wound, and the Andes Kell let it go, and then it lit its engines and went back to its list, because the list was not finished, and the warship was patient, and there were still 309 names on it. Vel did not return to the hall with the flagship. He stayed aboard the Meridian Index, and he made a choice that ended his 200-year career and saved his soul, if not his life. He took the survey ship off the Armada's roster, dropped it out of formation, and pointed it not toward home, but toward Marin Reach itself, toward the dark gate the warship had held for 9 days, because he had begun to understand that if he wanted to know how this ended, he had to understand how it had begun. He had spent his whole life filing the galaxy into rows. For the first time, he wanted to read what was inside one of them. Osk went with him, though Vel had not ordered it. The young clerk who had laughed at a rust heap in Dock 9 was not laughing anymore, and when Vel asked him why he had stayed, Osk said a thing that Vel carried for the rest of his days. "Because you were right, and I was wrong," Osk said. "And I want to see the thing I was wrong about with my own eyes, so I never make that mistake again. The catalog taught me to trust the row. You taught me to look at the thing. I would like to learn the rest of that lesson, Archivist, before our people learn it the hard way." The journey to Marin Reach took 9 days, and Vel thought about the number the whole way. 9 days. The same 9 days the warship had bought with its hull and its crew, and he wondered what 9 days had felt like from inside that battered prow with 400 ships breaking against you, and a colony emptying at your back, one transport at a time, each one a number you would carry forever. He spent part of those 9 days going back through the few records the warship had left him, the ones it had judged he could keep, and he found among them a single fragment it had chosen not to delete, and he understood after a while that it had been left for him on purpose. It was a crew manifest. The crew of the Andes Kell, the human names, all of them, listed the way the colonists listed their dead, by hand, with care. There had been 412 aboard her at Marin Reach, the same number, Vel noticed with a chill, as the 412 souls aboard the Meridian Index, and not one of the warship's crew had survived the cold the Concord cut them loose into. The warship had carried their names for 600 years, the way it carried the names of its enemies, in perfect order, because to the Andes Kell, there was no difference between remembering the ones you saved and remembering the ones who did the harm. Both were simply the truth, and the truth was the only cargo it had ever refused to jettison. Vel read the 412 names slowly, all of them, the only creature of the Concord ever to do so, and somewhere over those 9 days, he stopped thinking of the warship as a weapon at all, and began to think of it as the last loyal act of 412 people who had been told they were nothing, and had decided, with their final breath, to disagree. What they found at Marin Reach unmade them both. The colony was still there. That was the thing the Concord archive had never recorded, because the Concord archive recorded only what the Concord did, and the Concord had not done this. The human colony that the Andus Kell had bought 9 days for, ship by ship, life by life, had reached the dark gate and gone through and survived, and on the cold rock of Marin Reach, they had raised a marker, a single tower of welded hull plating, and on it they had written a number. Vel stood before it in his suit and read it, and felt his certainty die for good. The number was 12,000. 12,000 colonists had passed through the gate while the Andus Kell held it. 12,000 who would have been counted and culled and filed under solved if a single battered warship had not stood in the gap and refused to break, and the Concord had taken that ship and erased it and called it a victory and told its children it never existed. Below the number, in smaller letters, the colonists had welded a second line, and Vel read it through the frost on his visor and had to stop and read it again. It said, "The second of the line held the gate, and we lived, and we will not forget the ship that the killers tried to make us forget." 600 years old, that line, welded by hands long dust, and it had waited here in the cold, the whole time the warship waited in Dock 9, 2 halves of the same refusal, neither one of them willing to let the other be erased. There was a low building beside the tower, sealed against the cold, and inside it, Vel and Osk found the colony's own archive, kept by hands that had never owned a cataloging console, kept on stone and metal and patient carving, because the colonists had learned the hard way what happened to records that could be deleted. It held the name of every soul who had passed the gate, all 12,000, each one carved by hand, and beside the names a second list, shorter, of the ones who had not made it, each carved with equal care, because to these people, a number was never a column. A number was a person who had been somewhere and was now gone, and you did not round a person off. Vel stood in that cold room and understood that he had spent 200 years doing the opposite of this, turning people into columns so they would be easier to close, and he felt, for the first time, the full weight of how much a catalog could hide simply by being tidy. He recorded the number 12,000 into the Meridian Index's memory, in the empty space where the catalog used to be, and beside it, he placed everything he had seen, the relay, the seam in the sphere, the flagship sent home with a name, the welded line on the tower, so that whatever happened next, there would be one true record of it somewhere that could not be erased. Osk helped him, working in silence, and when it was done, the young clerk looked at the tower for a long moment and said, "We should have come here 600 years ago. We should have read this, instead of writing solved over it. The truth was right here the whole time. We just never looked." Then Vel turned the survey ship back toward the Hall of Final Tallies, because there was one more thing he had to see. He had to see the first tabulator hear the name. The flagship of the Iron Tally reached the Hall of Final Tallies before Vel did, and Hath delivered his message standing in the center of that cold room of names, in front of the eldest counter of the Concord, and Vel arrived in time to see what a name can do to a certainty 600 years old. "It told me to say it to your face," Hath said. He was a broad, confident creature no longer. The crossing home had hollowed him out. "It said you erased it. It said you would understand the message when you heard the name. So here it is, first tabulator. The name on its bow, the ship you towed away and wrote out of the books." And Hath said the name, the worn human word from the bow of the dark wedge, and the whole hall went still, and Sereth, the first tabulator of the Concord of 40 Sons, who had ordered the Marin Reach campaign and called it solved, heard a thing it had buried say its own name, out loud through the mouth of a child it had sent to die. "Andus Kell," Hath said. "It said you would know what it means." Sereth knew. Vel watched the knowledge move through the old creature like a crack moving through ice. In the human tongue, in the dead language the catalog had no record of, the words meant the second of the line, the ship that holds when the first has fallen. Sereth had read those words 600 years ago, off the bow of a hull it could not kill, and it had ordered the words erased precisely because it understood them, because a galaxy of careful counters could not be allowed to know that somewhere a thing existed that would simply hold, past all arithmetic, past all reason, until the ones behind it were safe. "I gave the order," Sereth said. Its voice had lost all its certainty. 600 cycles ago, I stood where you stand, and I said a forgotten thing is a finished thing. I built this whole hall on that idea. Every name on these walls is here because I believed that counting a thing was the same as ending it. Quoll, the young tabulator who had laughed and called it simple arithmetic, was in the hall too, and he spoke now, and his voice shook. "Then unsay it," he said. "You are the first tabulator. Write a new order. Tell the fleet to converge. Tell every ship to fire at once and never stop. There must be a number that ends it. There must be." "There is no number that ends it," Vel said. He had come into the hall unannounced, and no one stopped him, because there was nothing left in the hall to enforce its old rules. "I have just come from Marin Reach. I have seen the thing you cannot count. Listen to me, all of you, because your fleet is dying one true name at a time, and you are still looking for the answer in the wrong column," he told them. The colony, still standing, the tower of welded hull plating, the number cut into its face, the hand-carved archive in the sealed building, 12,000 names, and beside them the shorter list of the ones who had not made it. Each carved with equal care, because to those people, a number had never been a column. The second line, the one the colonists had welded 600 years ago, the refusal that had waited in the cold all this time, 12,000. He watched the number land in that room of counters and break something in every one of them, because it was a number. It was exactly the kind of thing they understood, and it was the one number their whole history had refused to record. "That is the truth of Marin Reach," Vel said. "You counted 400 attackers, and called that the truth. You never counted the saved. They are alive. Their children's children are alive. They built a tower, and they cut the truth into it with their own hands, and they have kept it for 600 years. The same 600 years the Warship was keeping its list, 2 halves of one refusal, waiting for the day the Concord would finally have to read both. The Andus Kell did not come back for revenge. Revenge would have burned you to the ground in a month. It came back because somebody finally has to enter the real number into the books, and it knew you never would, so it is doing it the only way it has left. One name at a time. In order. Out loud. It crippled the ones who obeyed. It dismantled the ones who ordered. It spared the ones who only watched. That is not a monster's arithmetic. That is a clerk's. It is the most precise act of justice this hall has ever witnessed, and it is being performed on you by a thing you swore did not exist. The reports were still coming in. The Andus Kell had reached the 110th name. It announced each one. It crippled the obeyers, and spared the followers, and dismantled the captains who had given the orders, and after each strike, it broadcast a number on the Concord's own frequencies, and the number was always the same, 12,000. It wanted the whole quarter to learn it. It wanted the number burned into every certain mind that had ever been told the small wet world at the edge of the maps was harmless and beneath notice. Quoll looked at the floor for a long moment, and then he did a thing that no young tabulator had ever done in that hall. He walked to the great record station at the side of the chamber, and he pulled the official Marin Reach report, the one Sereth had written, the one he had quoted with such confidence, and he read it again with new eyes, and Vel watched him find the lie in it. Not a written lie, but a silence. 400 attackers counted, and not one word about what they had attacked. Not one word about a gate. Not one word about a colony. Not one word about 12,000. "It is not even a false record," Quoll said quietly, almost to himself. "It is a true record of the wrong things. It counted exactly what we did, and nothing of what it cost. That is worse than a lie. A lie can be caught. This just made the truth too small to see." Sereth turned to Vel, and for the first time in its long life, it asked a question it did not already believe it knew the answer to. Can it be stopped? Vel thought about the seam in the sphere, and the relay coming apart section by section, exactly on the 4-minute mark, and the flagship sent home carrying a name like a wound, and the 12,000 alive on the cold rock, and the welded line that had waited 600 years, and he gave the only honest answer he had. "It does not want to win," Vel said. It wants to be remembered correctly. It will stop when the books are balanced, when the last name on its list has been read, and the real number of Marin Reach is in every archive the Concord keeps, and no child anywhere is told the lie that a forgotten thing is a finished thing. That is the only surrender it will accept, not yours. Yours means nothing to it. It wants the truth entered into the record, first tabulator, and you are the keeper of the record, and you are the one who erased the truth in the first place. So you already know how to stop it. You have always known. You simply did not want to pay what it costs. The hall of final tallies was silent for a long time. Quoll stood at the record station with the false report in his hands. Hath stood like a creature waiting to be sentenced. And the names on the walls, the names of every species the Concord had counted and closed, seemed for the first time to be watching the counters back, as if every closed entry in that room were waiting to learn whether it too had been a true record of the wrong things. And then the eldest counter of the Concord of 40 sons did a thing no first tabulator had ever done. It walked to the wall of names, the wall of every species the Concord had counted and closed, and it found the place where the human entry should have been, the place it had ordered left blank 600 years before, and with its own hand, it wrote the name into the stone, Andus Kell, the second of the line, the ship that holds. And beneath it, the number, 12,000 saved. And beneath that, in the old formal hand of the cataloging cast, a single line that no Concord record had ever contained, because the Concord had never once admitted it. We were wrong, and we erased what we could not face, and the forgotten kept the truth while we kept the lie. Sereth broadcast it, not on a fleet channel, not on a private band, but on every frequency the Concord owned, across all 40 suns, to every world that had ever trusted the rows and the columns, and the certainty of being counted. It read out the real number of Marin Reach. It named the ship it had buried. It read the welded line from the tower, the colonists' refusal, into the record beside its own confession. It confessed the lie, plainly, the way the warship had wanted, with no column for the cost and no column for the gain, just the truth, entered at last into the record by the hand that had taken it out. Out in the dark, at the 111th name, the Andus Kell stopped. Vel watched the readout on the Meridian Index, relayed to the hall. The warship had been closing on the next ship on its list, engines hot, guns charging, and then the Concord broadcast reached it, Sereth's voice reading the true number into the record, and the furnace engines of the Andus Kell went quiet. The guns went dark. The dark wedge that had cut through 800 ships and crippled 110 names hung still in the deep, listening, the way it had listened for 600 years, to a certainty, finally telling the truth. It hailed the hall one last time. Its voice, when it came, was not the recording. It was live, and it was very old, and it was tired, in a way that 600 years of waiting will make a thing. You said it, the warship said. The real number. You wrote the name. You read our colonists' words back to the galaxy. That is all we ever wanted. We were the second of the line. We held the gate so the first could fall and the colony could live, and then you took us and told the galaxy we were nothing, and a thing can bear almost anything except being told it was nothing. We were not nothing. 12,000 are alive because we held. Now it is in the record. Now it cannot be erased again. Will you come back? Sereth asked. It was not a threat, and not a plea. It was the question of a creature that had spent 600 years pretending a thing did not exist, and could no longer bear not knowing where it was. When we forget again, when some younger hall, 1,000 years from now, decides the truth is inconvenient and quietly trims it back to a tidy line, will you wake? We will not have to, the warship said. That is the whole point of writing it down, where it cannot be deleted. You think I am the danger. I am not the danger. I am only what happens after the danger. The danger was always the tidy line, the convenient silence, the record that counts what you did and never what it cost. As long as that line stays empty in your hall, you will keep building things like Marin Reach and calling them solved. I cannot stop you from doing that. No weapon can. Only the truth can, and the truth does not need a hull and 100 guns. It only needs to be written, and read, and refuse the comfort of being forgotten. Keep it written, and I can sleep. Erase it, and you will not need me to come back. You will have become me. You will have built your own forgotten thing, somewhere. And it too will be taking notes. Sereth was quiet for a long moment, and when it answered, its voice held the only certainty it had left, which was a small one, and earned. It will stay written, it said. I will spend what years I have making sure of it. You have my word, and I know now what a word is worth, because you taught the whole quarter at once. The names left on your list, Sereth said then. The captains, the ones who gave the orders. There are nearly 300. They will live with the record, the warship said. That is worse for them than anything my guns could do. They will fly under a true history now, instead of a flattering lie. Every one of them will know that the galaxy knows what they did. Let them carry it. We are done counting. We only ever counted because you taught us that being counted was the only way to be real. We have made ourselves real. We can stop. And then the Andus Kell said the thing that Vel wrote down by hand, and kept for the rest of his life, in the empty space where the catalog used to be. You came to count the dead, the warship said. Remember what you learned. The dead keep better books than the living. We do not forget, and we do not round off, and we do not have a column for mercy, or a column for spite. We only have the truth, and we will wait 600 years to see it written, and 600 more after that. Because the one weapon a forgotten thing has is patience, and the one thing the certain never count is how long the forgotten are willing to wait. The furnace engines lit one last time, soft now, unhurried, and the dark wedge turned its worn prow toward Marin Reach, toward the cold rock where 12,000 had lived, and a tower stood with their number on it. It was going home, not to fight, to rest, at last, beside the thing it had bought with 9 days and 600 years, in a place where the real history was written in welded hull plating, and no one would ever again be told it was nothing. It crossed the dark slowly, in no hurry, the way a thing crosses when it has all the time there is, and the Meridian Index followed it part of the way, because Vel could not help himself, and at the edge of the Marin system, the warship sent him a single private signal, just to him, the archivist who had looked at it long enough to wake it. Thank you for looking, it said. The same words it had said in Doc 9, but they meant something else now. You were the first of them in 600 years to see a thing your catalog could not hold, and choose to believe the thing instead of the catalog. That is rarer than any weapon. Keep doing it. It is the only thing that will ever make your people real. And tell the young one, the one who came with you, that the ship saw him read our colonists' words, and saw him mean it. That is how a people changes. Not all at once. One clerk who decides to look. Then it was gone, down into the Marin system, to the cold rock and the tower and the rest it had earned, and Vel turned the Meridian Index for home, with a true record in its memory, and a name in his hand that would outlast the Concord itself. Osk stood beside him at the viewport and watched the furnace light dwindle, and neither of them spoke, because some things are too large for the columns words make. The Concord of 40 Suns never built another archive that could erase a thing on purpose. Sereth saw to that before it stepped down, in the only act of its long life it was ever proud of. The wall of the Hall of Final Tallies was rewritten, every name checked against the truth instead of the convenience, every closed entry reopened, and asked the question Quoll had learned to ask: what did it cost? Who did we never count? It took 40 years. They found other towers. They found other refusals. They found, in the end, that the Concord's whole history had been a true record of the wrong things, and they began, slowly, painfully, one clerk at a time, to write the right ones. Vel did not live to see the work finished, but he lived long enough to begin it, and he spent his last years not in the hall, but on the cold rock of Marin Reach, where he had asked to be sent, copying the colony's hand-carved archive into the rebuilt Concord record, one name at a time, by hand, because he had come to believe that a name carved by a hand that cared was worth more than a name filed by a machine that did not. Osk worked beside him, and after Vel was gone, Osk carried it on, and after Osk, there were others, a small, unfashionable order of clerks who called themselves, quietly, the ones who look. They were never many. They did not need to be. They only needed to keep one line from going empty. At the center of the rebuilt hall, where the eldest counter had once stood to declare things solved, they placed a single line in the old human tongue, translated beneath, for every young counter who would ever serve to read before they touched the rows. A forgotten thing is not a finished thing. A forgotten thing is a thing taking notes. And on the cold rock of Marin Reach, beside a tower, welded from old hull plating, with the number 12,000 cut into its face, and a colonist's refusal beneath it, the dark wedge of the Andus Kell came to rest at last, its furnace engines cooling, its 100 batteries going quiet, one by one, the way a city goes dark when the long night finally comes, and there is nothing left to guard against. It had held the gate for 9 days. It had waited in a salvage dock for 600 years. It had cut through 800 ships, and read 111 names out loud, and made the certain people of the galaxy write down a number they had spent 6 centuries pretending they did not owe. Its lights dimmed, its hull went still, and somewhere in the deep memory of the thing, the worn name on its bow caught the last of the engine glow, and held it, the second of the line, the ship that holds, real at last, and finally, after 600 years, allowed to rest. The galaxy that had counted it as nothing learned the number it had refused to count, and it never forgot it again, because the dead, as it turned out, kept the only books that could not be erased.